The museum is not only about the exhibitions and the collection that we have, it's about trying to engage in a wider conversation, presenting the many meanings of design. And that's why we were so pleased to come to an agreement with Conor Octopus to start a series of books. In fact, there's more than one. Design in Britain is the kind of larger format that we're looking at, but we're also launching a smaller, more affordable range, which we have the first 4 titles of again here this evening. Is this an optimistic moment to be looking at design in Britain, or a pessimistic one?
It's a bit of both, and again, I hope this emerges in the essay, because there has been a feeling for 10 or 15 years that graphic design is in a process of transition, that it might be changing into something else, that the term itself is no longer adequate. Graphic designers do a lot of breast beating about this. I'm not sure it is a very helpful term. I prefer visual communication, of which graphic techniques might be one of the means that you use. But we're stuck with this thing, graphic design, and a lot of graphic designers love the term as a kind of badge of identity. But nevertheless, and perhaps Wally will come back on this shortly, they've seen, as they would see it, a kind of erosion of their responsibilities, their approach to visual communication, coming from people who are perhaps based in marketing or see the brand as being the dominant concern. And there is a kind of tension within design, both here in Britain but also abroad, between the need, as it were, to produce some kind of system for controlling design and the desire of designers themselves to be free, to take a few risks, to find things out in the process, and that if you bring the process too much under control, you seem to limit that possibility. So that that's a tension that's been there for a number of years, and it's not going away. In some ways, it's intensifying.
London, particularly, the whole of England, but London particularly, does act as an extraordinary magnet for people. That's the first thing. I think the second issue, you can call it visual communication if you like, call it whatever you like, but the word brand has meant, and Rick and I talked about this earlier, that CEOs, chairmen of companies, take what we do, whatever that is, very much more seriously than they ever did before. And that means, on the bad side, that there is all this rubbish of quantification and what is a brand worth, all that kind of drivel that you read about all the time, and using extremely long and meaningless words where very short and easy words will do, and a whole so-called professionalization of the business, which means that you don't take any risks of any kind whatsoever. On the one hand, that's the bad thing. On the other hand, the good thing is that they take it all much, much, much more seriously than they ever did before. And that means that whatever it is one does, whether it's online or whether it's visual or whether it's to do with smells or whether it's to do with noise or whatever it is, it's really, really important, because they know, that is to say the CEOs know, the clients know, that it means money. So that's good and that's bad. Those are, I think, my observations.
The thing that is amazing about design, for me it's really Britain, and that the book was called Design in Britain rather than British Design, because Britain was the place that opened up in the strongest way in the 1851 towards the world and said this design is international. And Britain again was the place that brought in the 1980s the critical thinking about the profession in terms of product and in terms of industrial design especially, which is, in that sense, the things that happened here are unique. And the people that came out of the combination of this international openness, the critical aspect, I guess, the heritage of the craft and the heritage of the engineering combined together with this necessity to communicate internationally to clients which weren't here, I think brought about something very unique that happened in Britain. Whether it's British, I think, yes, it has to be. It happened here with the people that studied here, grew up here, worked here. So in that sense, I would argue, and this has been it's almost against the way I've been thinking for a long time. I always try to say, no, design is design, and then there comes the nationality and all. But there is something very unique here.
For me, when digital was first, crashing over, I was a trained product designer with you at the Royal College, and we just stole bits from everywhere, and we kind of bundled it together and made do, and it was very punk. So how people invented punk back in the day and just snatched bits, we were allowed to do it. And I think if I was somewhere else, if I was in California or within Germany, I would have to conform. It wasn't celebrated, whereas here, you could get away with wearing a wedding dress and nobody really batted an eyelid, as long as you could do really good work. If you couldn't, you're an idiot.
Andrew, you must have had the most difficult task in the book to write about car design in Britain.
I did wonder what it was when you asked me. I see it in two ways, really. One is the spirit in which Wally introduced the idea of Britain as a milieu, as a kind of future lab, if you like. And Nissan said this very explicitly when they started their studio here. They said, it's got the vibe, it's international, it has a strong culture, but it's not, if you like, so jingoistic as Paris or Tokyo. And I asked the people I spoke to if they studied London in a systematic way, and the answer was they bring it to work with them. And I thought it was quite an interesting way to look at it. So the reality of Britain as a milieu in which design can flourish is very interesting, and obviously a lot of automotive work goes on here. And I mean, the other way I've tried to look at it is as a memory mine. And that's another discussion, really, what the validity of that is. The whole use of Bentley, not just with its forms, but even its sales catalogues and the stitching on the leather and the ring binders that the factory had around, and all of that stuff is really being picked over by people who are doing the development and the ancillary supporting material that would go with the sale of the car. Mini is another fascinating example, really, of the recreation of a dying form. So really, there are these two things happening, but in a way they're not coincident. The people, if you like, that are part of the Future Lab are not necessarily the same people who are mining the ancient reputations and brands.
I think we have to recognise in Britain that we are no longer not a first-rate power, barely a second-rate power, and we're part of Europe. And we're a very interesting part of Europe because the brain part and the imagination part here actually works very well. I accept that the manufacturing part, the making part, doesn't work very well. And maybe that's not such a bad thing either, despite all the recent wallowing in misery that we've all been going through. I don't see any particular reason why there's any cause for pessimism at all. This country still attracts very, very fine creative minds from all over the world and still produces enormously creative ideas which may be manufactured all over the place, and so on. I don't see anything to be particularly worried about.
Looking at the book as a whole and trying to get a kind of spread through it, I realised why it is that design museums are still full of chairs. Chairs last longer than electronics do. And if you're a designer, there is still something, even I think if you're Simon, who does the evanescent which disappears, there's still something, I think, unsatisfying about an object which, if it's a mobile telephone, is vanished in 6 months, and a chair which still has a validity after 100 years. Is that true?
Blessing and a curse. Blessing and a curse that your best work will be around forever, worse that it will remind you every day that it's not. My work does evaporate, and that's sometimes a good thing, and it's a good thing because the speed of how I work and the work that I'm in is ridiculous. It just accelerates all the time, and if you can get used to that acceleration, it's exhilarating, and you do learn very, very fast. You have to. So if I take 6 months out, I'm not unemployable, but I definitely need a restart. But I do miss the solid. I trained as a solid, industrial designer, and I think the skills, when you look at digital, I'm one of the oldest people in digital. I am literally Yoda in digital. And I think because it's so disposable, you're allowed to get away with that. Nobody dies from a bad website. People get bad backs from chairs. So I say, blessing and a curse.
Thank you all for a stimulating conversation. We're not going away. There's still some wine left. And there's even a few books over there. So thanks, everybody.